me? Okay, good. I don't like talking in the mic, but this will work. Can you hear? Okay, so I'll probably move around. Can you hear me now? Yeah. All right, cool. All right, thanks for having me. This is very exciting to be here. I'm honored to be here. And I don't know that I know how to do any of this. I'm just still learning. So I'm just going to put that caveat out there right away. But thanks for the introduction. And I will be talking about these ecosystems, stormwater ponds. Coincidentally, after Betty just gave us a talk about water management and water flowing and the importance of it. So this is a very fitting next step. Give you a little outline about my talk here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what my lab does, what are stormwater ponds, and whether or not we know if they're working or not. I'm going to talk to you about a study where we're trying to promote stormwater plantings, pond plantings, as a way to improve water quality and look at the social perceptions of those plantings and barriers to their adoption. And I'm going to discuss the next steps in research that we're taking on, or hopefully taking on, and I'm going to give you some resources. So you're welcome to, higher? Louder. You want me to speak louder? Okay. So then you're welcome to this slide presentation. You just want to reach out to me. There's my email. So I'll get you, you'll be able to access the resources I'm showing. All right, so what prompts my research? This is, and we've talked about this, what this shows here is the extinction rates of vertebrate species since the 1500s relative to background fossil records. And as we're approaching modern times, we can see the extinction rates are about 100 times higher than they used to be. And scientists will argue that we're living in the sixth mass extinction. We all know the mass extinction events that occurred on our planet where life almost went extinct. The most famous one that we're all familiar with, because we all like dinosaurs, is the asteroids, right? But this one is more ominous. It's caused by human activity. Largely, historically, it was overhunting and overharvesting, but now the biggest change and driver of biodiversity loss on our planet is actually land use change. And this has been discussed already. The fastest growing land cover type on our planet globally is urbanization. And this is a picture piecemeal together of the planet Earth at nighttime. And you can see the United States. Holy cow, we are an urban country. We are urbanized. And this is the fast growing land cover type, and the UN predicts that the human population, 2/3 of us, will live in urban environments by the year 2050. So we've experienced something really fascinating in our lifetime. The human has gone from a rural species to an urban species. Okay, now in the United States, what does this look like? It looks like residential land development, okay? This is the Villages, one of the fastest growing urban areas in the country. This, I don't know where it is. It could be anywhere, it could be Ohio. It's probably not Florida because of the trees, but look at the striking similarity. We've cleared out the native environment, put in lawns, a few ornamental shrubs, strikingly similar. It's called urban homogenization, okay? Now there's other environmental impacts, so we're replacing biodiversity with very homogeneous ecosystems. There's other environmental impacts of these ecosystems. We're introducing invasive plants. The way we're managing them, by poor plant selection, we're over-irrigating them. We're using fertilizers that have impacts on our water quality. We're using pesticides that have impacts on non-target organisms. So lots of environmental impacts. So the question becomes, that we're talking about today, what can we do to these landscapes to make them function better ecologically, and instead of hindering and harming biodiversity, give back to biodiversity? Okay, so my residential landscape ecology lab, that's what I call my group. These are pictures, this is a picture I took and that's a picture I took, but these are all organisms, animals that I've seen in my yard. And I live right in town in Gainesville, Florida. And I think, who wouldn't want this stuff in their yard? This is great. You know, me working outside and seeing an eastern box turtle in my yard, it's great. This is a glass lizard that was killed by a cat. So we're the Audubon Society, promote indoor cats. I love cats, I have an indoor cat. They belong indoors. The idea is we want to, my library wants to increase the ecological understanding that's right outside our door where we live. We're missing an opportunity for education. We're missing an opportunity to educate people about conservation. We might not all get to the Amazon or the Grand Canyon, and certainly appreciate the natural world outside the door. And we want to figure out how to design, construct, and manage these ecosystems, again, to support biodiversity and provide ecological benefits. And in urban areas, we actually have a lot of space. This is from Toronto. But you can go anywhere in urban environments and see these sort of green areas that we can take advantage of. Community gardens, landscaping areas, vacant lots, remnant natural areas. This is a green roof. We have a lot of opportunities, surprisingly, in urban environments. So I look at this through the lens of design ecosystems. Craig brought this up, they're not natural. So what can we do with these not natural ecosystems to make them support biodiversity? I work in ornamental gardens, I've worked in lawns and yards, I've worked in even new residential development to try to enhance biodiversity in these situations. And each of these are a critical component, though. They're designed for anthropogenic functioning, right? So we have to also balance the biodiversity with what we need out of them. Gardens are aesthetics usually, our yards and lawns, these are where we live and enjoy our recreate and comfort. And stormwater ponds, I'll talk about that here in a minute if I can get to the slide. That's what I'll be talking about the rest of the day today. So, before I continue though, I'm going to talk about why we have stormwater ponds, but I just want to acknowledge my collaborators. First, my lab group. I have a lot of researchers that have helped me with this. Other researchers, I want to highlight that because this is an urban ecosystem, we don't just have ecologists working on the team. We actually have stormwater engineers, we have biogeochemists, we actually have a group of social scientists because you can't think about urban environments with excluding people, right? And then we also work with county extension. They translate what we learn to implement real world change. And then these are some of the funders of my research here. The US EPA, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Manatee County, and then UF-IFAS, Center for Land Use Efficiency. Okay, so look at this beautiful lake. It's not, right? Most Floridians do not live on lakes. But they live on a stormwater pond, but many people buy homes on a stormwater pond at a premium. They spend extra money, $100,000 sometimes, and they're sold lakefront property. This is really challenging when you're trying to communicate what this should look like and how to manage this when they believe they bought property on a lake. Okay, something to think about. Interesting social dimension. So we see these things everywhere, and they're strikingly different. They're an engineered, designed ecosystem, but they can look shockingly different. Some look like they belong on a golf course, others look like a natural wetland if you didn't know better. Others look like a park setting. There's a lot of them around. Why are they there? Okay, well, when it rains naturally, and we get a lot of rain in Florida, historically with the natural environment, you get most of that rain infiltrates into the ground, goes back into the groundwater. Some of it runs off into our nearby streams and surface waterways, right? But urbanization messes that. Okay, we have a lot of impervious surfaces. It kind of flips that around. What we now have is very little water infiltrating back into the ground. Instead, it runs off of our impervious surfaces into our aquatic ecosystems. And along with it, it brings not just, flooding potential, but also a lot of pollution that comes off of our landscapes. So stormwater ponds are built mainly to prevent downstream flooding from this urbanization, this urban stormwater runoff, and to prevent that pollution from getting into our water bodies. What pollution gets into our water bodies, these are things that we can start to think about and control to prevent it from getting in there in the first place. Of course, all the stuff running off our roadways. We have organic debris, leaf litter that normally stay put, but washes into our stormwater system, breaks down, produces nutrients. Of course, we love to fertilize in Florida for some reason, nitrogen, phosphorus, and that puppy, as cute as he is, he's a poop factory, okay? So there's a lot of things running off of our urban landscapes. So what do? So we build stormwater ponds. And there's two different types generally. There's a permanent retention pond, it usually is dry. Water runs off our urban landscape, it goes into there, and it percolates into the ground over a 72-hour period. That's what it's engineered and designed for. And it's assumed that the pollution magically goes away as it just kind of trickles down through the soil and gets into our groundwater. Then there's temporary detention ponds. These actually have permanent bodies of water in them. The water comes in there and stays there temporarily, and the pollution is settled out and or removed through biological processes. That's what is assumed to happen. You can see that they both have overflow structures because, again, one of the main functions of this system is really for flood control. Okay, so we get a lot of rain, which we do in Florida. We need a mechanism for it to overflow and flow elsewhere so it doesn't flood our neighborhoods. That's how they're designed. Now, my postdoc, James Sinclair, mapped how many stormwater ponds there were in Florida. That's what this map is showing in blue. There's over 76,000, and that was in 2018. So there's probably a lot more now. And you can see this pattern of the I-95 corridor between Orlando and Tampa. Really fascinating connectivity at a large spatial scale. But let's look at how much area they take up relative to other urban land use cover types. They have more area of stormwater ponds and industrial in our urban environments in Florida and competing with recreational areas. So we have a lot of them, and they're taking up a lot of space. This is a stormwater pond in Manatee County where I work oftentimes, and you see the size of it. These are 3- or 4-story buildings in the background, okay? So we're using up a lot of space in our landscapes to deal with urban stormwater runoff. It's a major problem. So, stormwater ponds now, they do provide us ecosystem services. They do provide us benefits. The first one is regulating. We think about them as flood control, pollution removal, even carbon CO2 sinks, sometimes, not all the times. There's also food in there. Someone mentioned to me about fish stocking in your ponds, right? But there's food for us, we could use that, or for wildlife, but there's issues of toxicity. Again, there's pollution coming in here. There's bioaccumulation, so we have to be careful of that. Some people use them for irrigation supply. Culturally, they also add aesthetic value to our landscapes. People really like their stormwater ponds, and I put there's no accounting for taste here because when we get into the plantings, what people think looks attractive varies a lot. And then also habitat wildlife, right? We see them as habitat wildlife, but again, that's variable depending on your stormwater pond. That's what really attracted me to these things. I'm an ecologist, I'm a community ecologist. I was trained in biological invasions and restoration ecology, and I was fascinated when I see this hole dug in the ground just to capture stormwater runoff. The communities that would assemble in these holes with stormwater in them. You know, you see birds. This is a limpet. Species of concern at one time. Numbers are coming back now. Why? Because there's an invasive apple snail living in that pond that it feeds on. We have arthropods, macroinvertebrates. Actually, stormwater ponds and urban ponds, there's been studies done in Europe that show that they can have as much biodiversity regarding macroinvertebrates as natural ponds, which is really fascinating. We have fish in there. This is tilapia, not native species, but very edible. And of course, if you dig a hole filled with water in Florida, you're bound to get the albacore or gator. But anyway, you have a functioning food web here. This, to me, as an ecologist, is really fascinating. So we have all these stormwater ponds. The first question I wanted to ask with my lab group, are they working, right? My master's student, Kayla Hess, did this really ambitious project where she used depressional wetlands in urban environments as a model ecosystem. Depressional wetlands are isolated. They're isolated from overflow water, so we can assume that anything that's in that depressional wetland is either coming from the ground or flowing over the surface of the land. So they're isolated from other water bodies. What she did was, she found depressional wetlands that were protected by stormwater ponds. That means that the stormwater off the urban landscape first flows through a detention pond for pollution to settle out before it goes into the wetland. And then she looked at urban wetlands, depressional wetlands that were not protected by stormwater ponds. And then we also looked at natural wetlands for a comparison. And we looked at the plant communities, the soil and water chemistry, and we also measured the hydrology. So, the idea here is if stormwater ponds are protecting our natural systems, the communities and the soil soil characteristics should resemble natural. The ones being protected in urban environments should resemble natural environments, natural wetlands, more so than ones that aren't protected. And that's not what we found. Okay? We found that there was actually no difference between wetlands with or without stormwater ponds protecting them. In fact, we found elevated soil water levels for nitrate, phosphorus, and also pH. We found more non-native plants in these urban wetlands in general. We found more facultative than obligatory species that can tolerate more variability in hydrological conditions. We did find more native species in our urban environments, which is really interesting, but they were evolved to deal with stress and disturbance. And most of these changes were reflective or correlated strongly with changes in soil and water chemistry. So what this suggests to us is, look, we're putting all these stormwater ponds out there and they might not be working, right? Big surprise. So what we need to do is find a way to retrofit those stormwater ponds so that they do function, or start to think of other management ways to protect our natural water bodies, even our behaviors, which have been discussed today. So another interesting thing we found is when we were looking around at the stormwater ponds, we started to see invasive plants in these stormwater ponds. So we wanted to do a study and say, like, how many of these things are out there? How many invasive plants are out there? And we expected to find maybe like 5 common invasive plants in the stormwater ponds that we looked at. We actually found, we sampled 30 stormwater ponds. And what this figure shows here is the number of ponds that a given invasive plant showed up in, and whether or not it was one of those wet ponds or dry ponds. Okay? So what we found was 28 species in just 30 ponds. That's a lot. That kind of, we were like, wow, surprise, right? We thought there'd be 5 bully species. But what we also found was there wasn't, only a few of them showed up in more than half of the ponds. So there's high species turnover. What it means is people who are managing stormwater ponds aren't just dealing with one invasive plant. They don't know what invasive plant species they're going to be dealing with. There could be a lot of different ones they could be dealing with. And that's an issue for management. Now, let's get to the ornamental trade. When we looked at the source of the invasive plants, 71% of these plants were originally introduced for ornamental purposes. When we looked at them closer, 45% of them, even though they're noxious weeds and illegal to sell, we can still purchase. I called places and they said, yes, absolutely, we'll have a camphor tree for you by March. So these are noxious illegal weeds that are still being sold. So please start promoting, and this is the group here, native plants. What we did put in our landscapes does have environmental impacts, even though we think they're plants that are benign. Okay, so why are there so many? They're not working. They have invasive plants. They might have environmental implications. Why are we using them so much? It's called a presumption of compliance. And I'll explain what I mean by that as I go through this slide. There's a lot here. So, developers, when they develop, they are mandated to mitigate for mitigating flood risks that's caused by their development, and also nitrogen and phosphorus that come running off of the landscape from development. Stormwater ponds are a very easy option to use because they can do two of those things with one thing. Right? You dig a hole in the ground, fill it with water, you help mitigate for flood damage, and you help to remove pollution. So, and it also provides fill for the site. Okay, you can now use that fill that you dug up from your stormwater pond to raise your house elevation above the water table. In other parts of the country, that would mean you're developing on a wetland, but in Florida, you just raise the foundations. So there's a presumption of compliance. If it's meeting the engineering needs and holding the volume of water that it's engineered to do and approved, it's presumed to also remove 80% of total phosphorus, total nitrogen, and total suspended solids. That's the compliance, presumption of compliance. It's credited for removing those. The reality is not the case. They are removing some nutrients. 60 to 65% of phosphorus from the statewide study that's been done. For nitrogen, it's much less. Total nitrogen, it's anywhere from just 12 to 63%, very variable. And in fact, some of these stormwater ponds can actually act as sources of nutrients for downstream through nitrogen fixation that happens in them, and also the breakdown of the organic matter that gets into those ponds that runs off of our urban landscapes, such as leaf litter. So that gets me into the project I'm working on now. Manatee County approached us and said, we want to do something about water quality, and we want to plant some of the stormwater ponds we have with native plants. And because we think it might do something for water quality, it might benefit water quality. Of course, we jumped all over that because they were shelling out, flipping the bill for plantings, which are quite expensive. So we put together a grant. We got funding from the Florida DEP on this, which trickled down from the US EPA. And what they wanted to do is look at conventional stormwater ponds versus these now planted stormwater ponds and see how is this affecting water quality. They were addressing two challenges. The first is bank erosion. See that erosion there? This is in Lakewood Ranch. And these individuals who paid a premium are now losing property. And there's also a safety issue here. Okay, mowers, riding mowers have actually flipped and pinned people under the water and died. So this is a major concern for safety. And here's a video that my colleague Michelle Axon put together that shows how littoral plants can help with this problem. This is due to wave action in stormwater ponds. We think of waves in the ocean, but slowly over time, that wave action can cause these banks to erode. See if this video can play. Here we go. I can't hear her voice. Okay, so I'm gonna. Okay, you see how there's no waves behind those plants, but where there are no plants, you see the waves? It's basically a physical barrier that can help to stop bank erosion. Sorry, the volume comes through on that, but that was generally the footage that she showed. You can see this wave action where there's no plants, no wave action here. The other thing people wanted to address was algae. They don't like algae. Algae, look at this. This is not attractive looking. If you paid $100,000 to live on a stormwater pond or a lake, you don't want to see that, right? Oops. And, well, algae, surprise, algae has a function. Algae provides benefits with water quality. It uptakes nutrients. It's not a bad thing. But when you see this much algae, something's not right. There's a lot of nutrients in your water. And the idea here is that, well, if we start to use plants, maybe it can compete for the nutrients, and we'll see less algae. And you won't need to rely on things like this. That beautiful blue water isn't beautiful blue water. It's copper sulfate that's added there to kill algae. And it's a commonly used thing to kill algae, which raises questions about how much copper is in our stormwater ponds and our sediment. And also, the plantings will prevent grass clippings from getting into stormwater ponds as well. That's another idea. Grass clippings are actually nutrient rich. And we don't want nutrients getting into these stormwater ponds, right? We're trying to use them to protect our downstream water quality. So, how can plants benefit water quality in stormwater ponds? Well, we know they uptake nutrients, and surprisingly more important than the plants, the microbes that live on the roots of the plants can uptake nutrients probably even more, and also help to remove them and put them into the atmosphere. They help with bank stabilization, we've seen that. They act as a barrier to pollution and fertilizer runoff that might be getting into our waterways or into our stormwater ponds. And for that algae that people don't like to see, it might actually just hide it so they don't see it, right? So that might be, we've seen that. Of course, plants, we know the structure adds and supports biodiversity. But there is an important caveat here. We can't just assume that the plants are going to improve water quality all the time, because they do senesce. We do have seasons in Florida. People come from up north probably don't realize that, but we do have seasons here, right? Wet season, dry season, plants senesce. That leaf litter can fall back into the water, break down, decompose, and then act as a source of nutrients downstream if it's released. So we have to confirm that the plants are actually doing what they do, we think they're doing, helping to remove nutrients. And if not, where do they do that and under what conditions, and what conditions don't they? So that's what our study is doing. Now, another caveat. My colleague Paul Monahan, social scientist, started asking people in Lakewood Ranch, where there's hundreds of stormwater ponds, about plantings. And here's what they said. We don't like them. They look messy, right? They block the view of the water. They don't want to see plants. They want to see the water. They paid an extra $100,000 to see their lake, not the plants, right? The neighbors, they're also concerned that their neighbors don't like it. It's kind of like the Joneses effect. Well, if my neighbors don't like it, then I'm not going to do it. And then lastly, they're concerned about encouraging unwanted wildlife, snakes and gators, right? So that's what we've learned. People don't like it, but they like birds. There's this like disconnect between the function that plants provide for wildlife habitat and birds. And you might feel like beating your head against the wall when you hear this, but this is a great educational opportunity, right? This is an opportunity where you're like, okay, they like birds, so maybe you can hook them into the plants by knowing that they promote birds. All right. So this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to quantify the effects of these plantings on water quality, but we also wanted to delve a little more into that social perception, right? What are people's attitudes? Why don't they like them? What are the barriers we have to overcome to promote this as a potential best management practice? I just wanted to stop here and show you one of the before and after pictures. This is in the Bradenton Convention Center up in Manatee County. This is before. Sorry, it's poor lighting on the picture. And then after, about a year after the planting. It looks beautiful. And then I'll tell you what people thought about these plantings in a second here. So we looked at 3 different types of plantings in Manatee County and Stormwater, and also Sarasota County. The first is our conventional, right? The one we all know and probably don't love, and maybe some people do. Just grass. Mow it up over the edge and call it good. This is our stormwater pond. The second type that's being promoted very widely is you don't mow along the edges. You have no mow buffers. Okay, just stop mowing. That prevents fertilizer, instead of not fertilizing. It protects the water theoretically from the fertilizers and pollution that can be running off your landscape. And then you also plant littoral plantings. So there are no mow buffer zones and littoral plantings. And that's what I've seen a lot of communities trying to embrace and do something with. The third one is what Manatee County did. They planted the banks very heavily with native plants. This is not an option that a lot of communities are doing. It's very expensive. It was like about $10,000 a pond to do this, to retrofit these ponds. So these are the 3 styles we're looking at. We're monitoring water quality. We're looking at perception. We're looking at the willingness of people to adopt these practices and also barriers to adoption. And I'll just tell you right now, the water quality data is not analyzed. I'm sorry. It's not there yet. My graduate student is working on it. But we have a lot of stories to tell about the people so far and how we have established plantings. So irrigation is needed if you're going to take this on, if you're going to plant the banks. That seems weird. You're planting a stormwater pond with lots of water, but these plants up on the banks, they need water. So that's, right plant, if you pick the right plant that's drought tolerant, it can be okay on that bank. Once you irrigate it in, it'll do fine. We also found that pine straw mulch was actually very beneficial for weeds and maintaining moisture, and it didn't run off as bad as much as like other chip mulches did after rain events. And then there's communication was absolutely key here. What we found was that people who were proactively planting their ponds did not have their pond management companies communicating with their landscaping companies sufficiently. And they would have accidents like the landscaping company killing the plants that they planted, right? So the communication is critical here. We had similar issues with some of the projects we've done. Okay, so we did learn a lot from people with focus groups we held these focus groups, and the goal of the focus group was to bring people and educate them about what a stormwater pond is. You're not living on a lake, sorry, but this is what this thing's supposed to do. And also capture data from these individuals about how they connect with it, what they perceive about their stormwater ponds, and how they actually, like plantings or not. And these are who attended: homeowners who live on ponds, HOA board members, educators, pond management professionals, we had pond and landscaping committee members. So all these people are connected to ponds in some way, shape, or form. So as we look through this data, remember that. It's a little biased, right? These are people who have a connection with these ponds. It's not everyday Floridians, okay? So we held 3 of these events, and I'll go through some of the data here. This is a table, and I'll just highlight, that's why I have it in green. What we did was, and I say we, the social scientists on my team, they ranked, these are percentages in the table, they ranked what percentage at the time they used stormwater ponds in their neighborhoods for these different activities. Relaxing, bird watching, sunsets, watching sunsets, walking, picnicking, and fishing. Most people never used their ponds for picnicking or fishing. Okay, maybe that's not a bad thing until we understand the toxicity of what's coming off our landscapes. But what's really cool when we look over here, if you go 2 to 3 times a week and we look what people in their communities are using their stormwater ponds for, it's relaxing and bird watching is up there, right? So there's this human-made ecosystem that connects people with nature. To me, that's fascinating. I was trained as an ecologist. I'm not a social scientist, but to me, that's fascinating. And also sunrises and sunsets. Again, connections to nature out of human activities. Interesting. So now we ask people, okay, if you were to decide which pond planting you want, would you want it to be the conventional, this sort of no-mow with the littoral planting, or this full planting? Which one do you prefer? We asked them to rank that. In the conventional, everyone ranked that the lowest. They didn't like it. They thought that was the least. The no-mow with the littoral was ranked either the middle or the highest. This full planting was a lot of variation. People disagreed on it, whether or not that was their highest or not. But what really gets interesting here is when we get into whether or not the people were HOA board members or committee. Okay, this is a cool finding. So help me out with, I'm going to walk through this table. This is the percentage of responded and whether or not they ranked at the lowest, second, or highest, the full planting, the no-mow, the toral, that kind of middle, or the conventional. If you're not on an HOA board member, people like this full planting. They like it. If you are an HOA board member or work on a pond committee, they like that middle one the best. Now, why is that? We don't know. I can speculate but we all probably have speculations as to why that is, but we don't fully know, right? Now, another interesting thing. Social scientists ask people, how much power do you feel you have about changing stormwater pond policy where you live? If you were not on an HOA board, you either had very few felt like they had a lot. People said they felt like they had some, only a little, nothing at all. But look at these HOA boards, everything. I can get all sorts of things done. I can get a lot done. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you really want to promote native plantings in stormwater ponds, yeah, let's keep in touch with the homeowners who want this. But man, we need to get into these HOA board meetings and start talking to them. And what is that cause of a certain discrepancy? Okay, so let's just real quick conclusions here. Benefits of stormwater pond plantings, we know they're beneficial for bank stabilization. We know there's benefit for wildlife. They have that sort of structure and diversity that promotes macroinvertebrates and other wildlife. Water quality benefits, we still need to confirm. We do need to confirm where they are beneficial and where they're not beneficial and how to design them to be beneficial. Now, as far as perceptions go, well, so far we're learning that they differ between board and non-HOA and board members. And board members like less planted, people not on boards like more planted. So again, target those board members when promoting pond plantings, or get on the boards if you have time. You know, you can have a lot of power too, I guess, if you're on the board. So next steps. Obviously, we have a lot of water quality data, and that's probably what people really want to see, and myself included. But what causes this sort of difference between the HOA committee members? Like one speculation I have is, if you're on a board and you're on the HOA board, you're the one hearing the complaints from people. Maybe it's that quiet or that vocal minority who just doesn't like plants screaming and yelling at you every day. We don't feel like dealing with that, right? You can't blame that perspective. And we are going to send out larger email surveys to the broader Manatee County and Sarasota communities to get more of a diverse spectrum of people besides the people in our focus group. But the focus group did help us to word those questions better. That's what the focus groups do. Okay. Things that I'm really fascinated about with stormwater ponds as well, what I would like to see moving forward is, we have all these stormwater ponds, right? Again, you can see connectivity across large spatial scales. How does it affect species movements across urban landscapes? How does it affect and help species to move across otherwise inhospitable environmental conditions? What are the traits of the species that benefit? Are they all just ruderal, weedy, invasive, or can we actually build and design them to promote native species and beneficial species? I believe that there's conservation and educational potential with these ponds as well. We see people connected with them. In fact, it's the water body. Dr. Laura Warner at the University of Florida did a study and shows that stormwater ponds are actually the water body that people most connect with in Florida. I mean, fascinating. Not our springs, not our ocean, not our, so it's just amazing. But here is a stormwater pond that was built by the Wetlands Club under Dr. Mark Clark, I believe, who organized this. It's called the SEEP. And it was designed as a self-contained ecological system. They treat it as a restoration, but it's really designed for stormwater management. There's a boardwalk through there. People come through, they look at nature, they see birds, they see plants. It's a beautiful place. So we're missing an opportunity for education about conservation and ecological environmental consensus just by, how we design these. And it's a location that's convenient for people to come and learn about these things. And of course, we do need to eventually figure out how to improve their function. Okay, we have a lot of them, they're being used, and they're not meeting their water quality goals. So we need to figure out how to do that, or come up with alternative solutions, and those solutions probably do include our behaviors on the landscape before the water gets into the stormwater pond. Okay, so some resources. Again, this is why I want to share this slide presentation with you. This is a Slack page that we put together for that project where people can join and communicate with one another. Slack is kind of like a targeted Facebook group that centers around a topic. You can design one for your lab groups, your work community, whatever. We designed one for stormwater ponds. And people will get on there and ask questions about, how to do things better with managing stormwater ponds. So if you're interested in that, here's a link. You can ask to be join that. Michelle Atkinson put that together. Florida-Friendly Landscaping Program is actually working on developing and expanding a Healthy Ponds program where people can actually go and get trained to learn about the function of stormwater ponds, what their roles are in the urban landscape, why do we have so many, what they're supposed to do, and how can we make them actually healthy and meet their requirements. There's a lot of EDIS documents out there too. This one here is one that I put together with my colleague Dr. Evan Bean and Dr. Gail Hansen, and what it shows is it's a database. It walks people through how to use this database of about 80 native plant species, and it points to their traits. Okay, a lot of times in stormwater pond plantings in HOA communities, what they'll do is they'll just find plants that look nice, and they'll say, all right, let's just plant the stormwater pond. But this helps them to select plants more on what they want them to do. For example, this will help you find plants that will help with bank stabilization. It'll help you find plants that will support pollinators or biodiversity, things like that. So you can make more intelligent plant decisions. Here's one that was put together by, I believe it's Dr. Abby. She's put together one that was about buffer zones. The importance of buffer zones around stormwater ponds and their functions and how to manage them. Another website here that was designed by Michelle Atkinson, an extension agent in Manatee County. It's Stormwater Pond Info for You. So you can go there, and there you can find these documents and different information about how to manage stormwater ponds, including this one here about pond buffer zones as well. Like, how do we manage these no-mow buffer zones, right? We were talking today earlier about no-mow buffer zones are a great idea. They're easy, but inevitably you're going to end up with invasive plants like torpedo grass. So how do you deal with that sort of issue? And then there's also some survey there that you can take to tell us about your pond. So this is a deceptive way for us to capture more data from you. So, no, but while you're getting information from us as well. So, that's it. Thank you. I want to end it in this picture. This is one of the planted stormwater ponds that I just love to go see. It's a really beautiful pond. This is in, again, Manatee County, and this is a pond that Manatee County manages. So hopefully this is inspiring you to think about stormwater ponds a little bit differently. So thank you.